Hola, hoy comparto con vosotros una entrevista que tuve el honor de realizarle al neurocientífico sueco Ole Johansson. El profesor Johansson trabaja para el prestigioso Instituto Karolinska de Suecia y actualmente es una de las máximas autoridades en cuanto a conocimientos de los efectos de los campos electromagnéticos sobre la salud. Ha publicado cientos de artículos científicos originales, uno de los últimos, por cierto, ha aparecido en la prestigiosa revista Nature, y forma parte de un grupo de científicos independientes de todo el mundo que llevan años alertándonos de los graves riesgos que suponen para la salud la brutal radiación a la que estamos siendo sometidos procedente de toda esta tecnología inalámbrica que nos rodea, procedente de antenas de telefonía, sistemas wifi, teléfonos móviles inalámbricos y demás aparatos relacionados con la tecnología inalámbrica. Hablar alto y claro al profesor Johansson le ha salido muy caro, ya que al igual que les ha ocurrido y les ocurre desgraciadamente a muchos otros científicos independientes, vive desde hace años amenazado de muerte, sin financiación para proseguir sus investigaciones y sometido a constantes campañas de acoso. Creo que es especialmente importante que escuchemos y apoyemos a científicos valientes como el profesor Johansson. Si no lo hacemos por nosotros, hagámoslo al menos por las futuras generaciones, ya que incluso escuchándolo hoy, probablemente para muchos sea ya demasiado tarde. Y resalto, informémonos de fuentes independientes, que no las vamos a encontrar nunca en medios de comunicación que reciben ingentes cantidades de dinero del lobby de las telecomunicaciones. Esto es muy importante tenerlo en cuenta. Asumamos cada uno, por favor, la responsabilidad que sí tenemos para cambiar este nuevo capítulo demencial de la historia en el que nos han metido. Antes de pasar a la entrevista, muy rápidamente un agradecimiento súper especial a Montse Ferrer de la ONG Oikos Ambiental de Mataró. Gracias a quien esta entrevista ha sido posible. Sin más, os dejo ya con el profesor Johansson. Good afternoon, Professor Johansson, and thank you so much for sharing your precious time and knowledge with the viewers of my YouTube channel and blog. You're a world-leading authority in electromagnetic fields radiation and their health effects, and you were one of the first scientists who began researching about this more than 30 years ago. So many people who may be watching this video may have just been informed about the dangers of mobile phone radiation, antennas, Wi-Fi routers, and so on through the media, or maybe they've just read what the World Health Organization says about this. And they may get the idea that there's not enough evidence to be worried about it. So since the message that we get from authorities and the media is so different from that of intelligent scientists and independent scientists like you, could you tell us why do you think this is happening?
Well, to begin with, it worries me that these authorities do not worry, because in English you say follow the money, and if you go to this special area, there are a number of players that have abandoned ship. Already 10-15 years ago, people, for instance, in the manufacturers industry, the operators, the insurance companies said, no, we will not take any responsibility for health effects of electromagnetic fields. And that's more telling than any political decision or anything you can find in research. And I was at a meeting 2004 in London, and then representatives of, for instance, Lloyd's UK and Reassurance, which is a big company in Switzerland, and representatives of Ericsson, the big telecommunication manufacturer, Nokia, and other people from other divisions, they all said that for them it was not the question if there are health effects or not. The question was only who is going to pay for it in the future, and they will not pay for it. That was the message. It may sound harsh and sort of illegal, but I mean, this is a business model we encompass here in the Western world. And so they just left all the responsibility and liability to the society, to governments and parliaments. And if I was the Prime Minister, I would be very worried that they have jumped overboard. And since then, a lot of other players have left the ship too. For instance, radiation protection authorities in many countries who talk about that it's safe, but for safety reasons, maybe you shouldn't use it so much, and you should keep it away from your body, you should use hands-free devices and so on. And for me, that's very odd. Either a thing is safe or it's not. And they are telling you that they are withdrawing. And also the World Health Organization has cancer classified these electromagnetic fields from all these gadgets, both the power frequent magnetic fields, which is a long name for household electricity, and also radio frequent fields, including microwaves that are used for telecommunication. And they wouldn't do that if it was safe. And according to the information I have, this is due to the fact that they don't want to end up in a court of law. And therefore they say this can be potentially carcinogenic, and it leaves to the consumer to decide whether they should expose themselves and their families or not. And for me as a scientist, it's very odd, like in Sweden where I come from, parents are forced to put their children into schools that are wireless, and they're exposed to something that the World Health Organization in Geneva has cancer classified. And parents still have to put their kids there, you know. And for me it's very odd, because after all we are talking about toys. These are not life necessities like clean air and clean food and good water and love and understanding and compassion, that kind of things. These are toys, and they are wonderful toys. You can do a lot of fun things with them, but also on another track, from a pedagogic point of view, they are not impressive at all. And more teachers are now reacting. And I just saw this very morning in the largest Swedish tabloid, Aftonbladet. They had a poll among the readers asking if it is all right to take away the mobile phones and the tablets from pupils in schools, and more than 93% of the readers say, yes, do that, you know. So there is a strong reaction being built. And as you said, when I started, most of your viewers and readers, they were not even born. That's 35 years ago. And at that time already there was a lot of evidence pointing to that these type of artificial, modern, man-made electromagnetic fields do harm molecules, cells, tissues, organs, animals, plants, bacteria, etc. And since then, there's been an avalanche, a flood of new publications. I just again saw this very morning when I was waiting to go downtown here. I saw on the computer that I had received 5 new publications since yesterday. So they are streaming in all the time. And that worries me that people are not worried, you know.
So you've said that there are different types of electromagnetic field radiation. Would you be so kind to explain to us what they are and which are the most harmful and most common sources of them?
That's a very complicated and big question actually, but I mean, in our everyday life, we would use, for instance, household electricity to power different lightings and different stoves and television sets and radio sets and so on. But then also for communication, we would use high-frequency signals like microwaves to communicate between the mobile phone and a receiving antenna somewhere, a base station. And the base station will also send back the conversation when we need to talk with someone. And in society today, we have a lot of sources like television, radio, all these wireless telecommunication devices, the household electricity, the power lines, trains, etc., etc., etc. And electricity is, of course, fantastic. But as I said before, very early, people started to realize that there could be side effects. And like in the 1920s and 30s, there were anecdotal histories about people that said that they felt bad when they got close to this new electricity. And in the 50s, there were a lot of amateur radio users that also got a lot of symptoms like strong headaches, etc. But it was not really until the end of the 1970s when Nancy Wertheimer and Ed Leeper in Denver, United States, they associated power lines with childhood leukemia, leading up to, and their publication is from 1979, but 2001, the World Health Organization actually also cancer classified power frequent magnetic fields in association with childhood leukemia. So there has been a stepwise development of knowledge here, and it's very difficult to know today which is sort of the worst radiation source. The only thing you really can say is that if you measure in a room like this, I would guess in the order of 70 to 80% of all the energies here are from wireless telecommunication. So it's a major new source. And also the exposure levels compared to natural background are just astronomical. The increases are in the order of quintillion times and more, and that's a 1 with 18 zeros after, so it's biblical increases. And from a scientific point of view, it would be very odd if not living cells would react to such an enormous increase in exposure. And as I said, if you go to the scientific literature, you will drown. There are so many papers clearly pointing to that this is hazardous. Again, doing that all these operators, manufacturers, insurance companies, radiation protection authorities, World Health Organization has abandoned ship. They are gone. And from a legal point of view, we are naked. And we must hope that our countries will take care of us. And as you know, in the industry, it's often that the profit goes to their shareholders, but the costs goes to parliaments, governments, taxpayers, and citizens, you know. And you know, microwaves, they are in a special frequency domain between 300 megahertz to 300 gigahertz. So that's the definition. And there you would find a lot of radio, television, all mobile telephony, tablets, that kind of things, you know.
Okay. So regarding this radio frequency electromagnetic fields, microwaves coming from all sorts of wireless devices, antennas, and so on, you've already said that the existing exposure standards are not good for us.
Well, I mean, I don't have to say that, because the European Union Parliament, September 4, 2008, said that the guidelines that we use are completely obsolete and do not protect the public.
Okay.
So I don't have to say anything really. They have already said it. And they base their conclusion on a very big report called the Bioinitiative report. And it summarized approximately 2,000 scientific references and in 600 pages. And it was launched August 31st, the year before 2007. And 1 year later on, the European Union Parliament said these guidelines have to be changed, you know.
So what standards would you suggest instead, the ones which are now?
Well, since we are talking about so many suspicions and so many results and scientific reports, etc., all pointing in the same direction, and since we are talking about toys that can be changed, I mean, for instance, if you have a wireless school, you can just as well have a wired, shielded school. The games and the information, it will be exactly the same for the children. And therefore, I have already in 1997 said that we ought to use what we in Sweden would call a hygienic safety standard. And I said we should use the natural background as such. And that means that we cannot allow this whole body 24/7 exposure of everyone, regardless of where they live, where they work, where they go to school, where they play, We just have to stop it until we can say that now we have a safe system. And I hope I'm wrong, actually. I always tell people that, because that would be the best, that it turns out to be completely safe, all of it, but then also a lot of scientific studies, and for each day more and more and more, all must be wrong at the same time. And we are counting on 25,000 papers or more. And that has never, ever happened in science, that so many papers are wrong at the same time. So I think we must live with the assumption that here are forces let loose that we cannot control as it is now. It is harming our bodies, our cells, our molecules. And among these damages, the most scary one is definitely that they are genotoxic, that they harm our DNA molecules, which are the basis for the genome and all our future generations, and can also explain why, for instance, we see an association with cancers and different diseases, fertility decreases, etc.
Okay. So what you've told us about the genotoxic effects, but I guess there are many other effects on
Yes,
our
there
health.
are, and when you see all the papers being published, it takes quite some time because you need to go through every species, for instance, every type of molecule, every type of exposure situation, and so on. But I mean, I could just quickly mention, apart from the genotoxic effect, that you see dramatic effects, for instance, on plants, on bacteria, on insects, on different other animals, and also on human beings, including fertility responses, and you have leakage of the so-called blood-brain barrier, and so on. And also, should we say, soft effects in the sense that they don't kill you, but you get headaches, you can changes of the heart rate and the frequencies and the output levels of the heart, and you can also see changes on the EEG. You have a decreased learning capacity, a decreased concentration capacity, a decreased short-term memory capacity, etc. Things, at least for school children, ought to be the opposite, So maybe we are dumbing kids down. And Sweden, it's probably the most computerized school system in the world. And still in the recent PISA tests, where they have checked for learning abilities, Swedish kids have plummeted. They are going bad in math understanding, in reading capacity, and funny enough, also in IT knowledge, information system knowledge, in computer handling and so on. They're getting dumber. When you see all these animal experiments as well as human experiments, if I was responsible for the teaching in Sweden, I would say, no, stop, we must reconsider this. Are actually all these computers and tablets and mobile phones doing things to the brain of these children that make their capacity less good?
Okay. Maybe they can affect also eyesight or hearing capacity?
There are studies on that, and there is also an association to so-called acoustic neurinomas, which is a benign form of tumor on the hearing nerve. And when you talk with people like in Sweden, very many today complain about tinnitus. And that was the only symptom that all persons with the so-called electrohypersensitivity had in common. So there is something going on with ears for sure. And again, when you ask people, even from the telecom industry, if they want to have hearing problems, no, they don't want to have that. And you ask them if they want to have headaches, no. But that's what you actually get. And I'm surprised that the consumers are not more angry, and step up and say, no, we don't want that for us and for our children. Enough with this. And as I said before, it would be easy to introduce the wired, shielded system without any such background radiation at all. And it wouldn't change anything. We would still have the same games and internet pictures and whatever people are looking at, it would be exactly the same,
So this could also affect parasites, bacteria, fungus
Yes, yeah,
in
they're
our
already,
body.
yes,
It
they're
can
already,
it could
yeah.
alter their behavior.
Yeah, there are already papers on that, including their chemistry, behavior, and so on, and physiology. So it seems as if life in general is at jeopardy here. And, as I said, I want to be wrong because it would be hard to wake up in the future realizing that, oh wow, it really went down, and have not spoken up. And therefore, I think parliaments, governments, health authorities, and so on, they must come together and decide, should we continue this whole body experiment with the whole population, or should we go in another direction? And there are countries that are very interested in developing tomorrow's green, human-friendly technologies, and that could, of course, be a great asset for such countries in the future. And for instance, to Sweden, close to us is Norway, and in Norway, people are very interested in developing human-friendly technology. So perhaps in the future, mobile phones will not be Nokia or Ericsson, they will all be Norwegian. So that's a possibility.
How about our behavior, our mood, the way we feel? Can all this affect us also?
Yes, and there are a number of very interesting studies. I'm just going to mention one. These electromagnetic signals actually affects our morality, how we look upon moral and upon each other, and there is a decrease in morality. And when you talk with people nowadays, many say, oh, society has been so immoral, people don't pay any respect any longer to moral concepts and ideas and values. And in experiments, that's exactly what's happened. So again, it's fascinating to see that so many sort of public experiences can be explained from a scientific point of view. And I do hope that we are not jeopardizing the future of mankind, of life as it is on this planet. So hopefully I'm wrong.
I hope so. Sleep, they can also affect our
Yes,
sleep.
and that's especially interesting. And in Sweden nowadays, when you investigate sleep in the general population, more than 1/3 of the Swedes report strong problems, big problems with nighttime sleep. And in controlled experiments, you have different stages of your sleep. Stage number 4 is called the dream sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. And that's the stage when your body and especially your brain should repair itself. When you expose human beings to electromagnetic signals, this stage 4 disappears. Again, suddenly you have an explanation, and I'm not naive. I do understand that people have other problems and issues like stress, but that's not the whole explanation. And especially not when you do controlled experiments where you can rule out any such confounder, pinpointing the electromagnetic field exposure as being really bad for you. And again, when you ask people, do you want to lose your dream sleep? People say, no way. But that's what's happening,
So if someone has an illness like cancer, for instance, and he or she cannot repair.
Exactly, and it could mean that it could more rapidly go downhill and they could die sooner. And we have done studies where we have looked on something called prevalence-based mortality, meaning how many persons in the population that are ill, and in this case in malignant melanomas, the skin tumor. And we saw that when body resonant radiation was introduced, many of these people being very ill died quickly. So it could actually mean that we have killed off people much quicker than we meant to do, just by introducing something so fun, that radio, television, mobile phones and so on.
And then you see antennas near hospitals. And
yes, and it's very important to understand regardless of where the antenna or base station is, the whole of the society is irradiated at biblical levels. I mean, it's hard to even understand the exposure levels. They are astronomical, and more than that, you know. So the base station as such, it's somewhere, but the exposure level is enormous, you know.
Okay. So it is the same in terms of health negative effects, for instance, to live near an antenna, to be using a Wi-Fi at home, to be using a mobile phone?
That's a very good question, and there are no hard data on that. It seems, again, you know, we're talking about such enormously high exposure levels, so it doesn't really mean much. But there are papers, very interesting papers, that have seen that you have a gradient. The closer you live to antenna systems, the more illness, and the further away, less. They need to be replicated. Unfortunately, we don't have any money to do it, but it would be very interesting to do it in an even more controlled way. But it points to that maybe it's bad for you to live close to a mobile antenna or some other installation of that sort. But of course, even living further away, you are still exposed at enormously high levels. And if you use a handheld device like a mobile phone, the further away from the antenna you live, the more it will expose you, because it needs to shout higher and higher and louder to the antenna. So whatever you do, you sort of end up in a bad situation, I would say, you know. And when people fight antenna installations, I always tell them, don't bother about the antenna. Fight the microwave exposure. That's the culprit, you know.
I read a few days ago an article published by some scientists last February in the International Journal of Oncology, the title of which is "Mobile phone radiation causes brain tumors and should be classified as a probable human carcinogen 2A." So there are scientists asking already to classify it as 2A.
And some scientists even go one step further, that they should be classified in the class number 1, you know. Yes. So there are movements, and still I would say that the research is not so strong, and is, especially when you look on incidence data, meaning the number of new cases of these particular tumors, like in Sweden and other countries, they are not increasing. They're actually slowly decreasing, pointing to that maybe it's not such an easy and clear association. And before we make any sort of wrongdoings here, we need to know better. But at the same time, of course, I want to introduce this hygienic safety exposure level, meaning the natural background, meaning no radiation.
Great.
Because I don't think we can afford to jeopardize the future of the entire mankind, the entire animal kingdom and plant kingdom, you know. It's just too much to jeopardize that.
So what can we expect to happen to the health of these future generations, these children who are living surrounded by all this radiation?
Yeah, I mean, that's really a core question, I would say. And I do hope nothing changes or happens. But if you look in the scientific literature, they could be facing quite a lot of problems in the future.
In the near future, maybe.
Even in the near future, I agree, definitely. And maybe that is already happening. There are signs, you know, that things that we see in our laboratories are already ongoing in the society. For instance, a rapid decrease in male fertility. And in the laboratory, in the test tube, sperm cells do not like to use mobile phones. So you have an association, a very clear association there.
There are some people who experience a wide range of symptoms when exposed to electromagnetic fields. They are electro-hypersensitive people. Could you tell us which are some of these symptoms that these people experience?
To begin with, before we talk about symptoms, we can talk about their organs.
Okay.
The most common organ to react first is their skin.
Okay.
And when it was personal computers with computer screens. It was often the face, the neck, and parts of their thorax. And also their hands and arms to some degree.
You were the scientist who named the
screen
dermatitis.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But nowadays we have other gadgets and other organs also come into play. And for instance, I had just a few days ago a person coming to me repairing, I asked if I could call him on his mobile phone, and he said he didn't use it. And I said, why not? You know, when I use it, I get a headache and tension in the body here, and also a very strong pain in my ear. So I don't use it, he said. Okay, so how should I call you? I said, well, you have to use my landline number at my office, he said. There you can call me. And then it struck me that that's a very common also situation nowadays, that people do report symptoms. And then we're talking about, for instance, concentration difficulties, short-term memory problems, heart palpitation, breathing difficulties, tinnitus and ear pain, sensations like dry skin with pricking pain, redness, swelling, etc. So there are a number of symptoms, and they can all be mimicked more or less in laboratory experiments as well.
But maybe we are all in a certain way electrohypersensitive, aren't we?
Yes, that's also a very interesting question, because when you look upon data from different studies, we know to begin with that we are all electrosensitive. If we take our fingers and touch a live wire, oh Jesus, that will hurt, you know. And when we were kids, we were licking batteries, you know, to sense this tingling sensation on our tongues. But the question is everyone electrohypersensitive also? Maybe, maybe not. And I always tell people that we should be very thankful to people with electrohypersensitivity, because they are what we call biological indicators that something is not correct, something is wrong in the environment. And they react before you and I react. And oddly enough, in the future, if we don't do anything, maybe they are the winners as very poor people, like in Africa and so on, because they cannot afford to buy and use all these gadgets, and therefore they will not get cancer. They will not get neurological damage and so on, which are long-term health effects. So they could be the winners, you know. Although today, naturally, being functionally impaired in a society, it's very difficult to live and work and function. But in Sweden, they are regarded as disabled or functionally impaired. So there they're entitled to get support.
Okay, so you've mentioned that in Sweden they are considered functional impaired.
Yes.
But some say that electrohypersensitivity is a disease. So what do you think about this sort of disagreement?
To begin with, in Sweden, as you say, they are recognized since the year 2000 by the Swedish government, by the way, and also by the Nordic Council of Ministers as a functionally impaired group. And legally, that's very important, because that's the biggest legal umbrella that will protect people. And of course, if a functionally impaired person needs to go to a doctor to get some treatment, like for a headache or a pain in the ear or something, of course they can do that. But always, as functionally impaired, it's the environment that needs to be corrected. And the corrected system to do that is by using accessibility measures. And again, if they are right, and if we correct our society, we lower the exposures, maybe you and I will also be winners, because we will not get cancers and neurological diseases and so on. As a disease and patient, then it's not the environment that is going to be treated, it's you. Yeah. And the question is, how should we treat you? There are no treatments whatsoever apart from like cognitive behavioral therapy, but that's also morally and ethically a very difficult thing, because if I treat you and you get back and work with your computer and you use your mobile phone, and 30 years later on you get a brain tumor, who is then actually responsible? Will you be happy then? I don't think you will. I think you will be very, very sad. And therefore, I think it's very important to keep the functionally impaired as they are, as functionally impaired, yes, but also as biological indicators. But there are no patients, they don't have any diagnosis. You shouldn't treat them, you should treat this environment.
It's similar, well, at least I see it like that. It's similar to tobacco smoke.
Exactly.
Some people react, like me, react strongly to tobacco smoke, but we are not ill when we react to that.
No, but I mean, if this interview would have been done in 1950, then we would have treated you instead of saying, take away all the tobacco smoke. So it's exactly the same, you know.
Okay, so some movements are asking for the right to have white zones, zones without this harmful radiation, but we all have the right to live enjoy life in a clean environment, in a friendly environment, and not to be confined to white zone sort of ghettos.
I agree, and again, you know, it's a very odd situation because you and I, while we do this interview, we are exposed to something the World Health Organization has cancer classified. And remember that the World Health Organization, if they thought it was safe, they do have a class 4 of proven non-cancerogenic substances and exposures, and they didn't pick that. They took 2B. So actually, you and I should really file a complaint to the United Nations regarding our human rights, because among the human rights is to live, as you say, in a safe and clean environment and live an equal life in a society based on equality. But we are not. Someone has said that we are going to expose you with something that the World Health Organization means could be potentially carcinogenic.
Yeah, and you cannot avoid this
radiation.
You cannot avoid it,
no.
And it goes through the walls of your house.
Yeah, everything, yes.
Your children, even if you don't want them.
Through the floor, the ceiling, the walls, anything, you know. And it's really a very odd situation from a human rights point of view. And I was the first one, actually, who told people that they should look on these laws that were done after the Nuremberg trials, 1947 and so on, and they should use them to file complaints, because this is a strong violation of the human rights, and especially if we also introduce the concepts of functionally impaired electrohypersensitive people. And therefore, they are so important, the electrohypersensitive people, because they will be a mirror of society, but also I would say they will form a plow and making a new road, pointing to that we have to have a safe society. And I mean, if that means that we instead use wired system, what's the problem? I cannot see that, you know. I don't want to harm anyone. I don't want to harm children, for instance. And I always say, better be safe than sorry.
So meanwhile, common sense returns to humanity. Are there any measures of protection that we can take in order to reduce the exposure to all this harmful radiation?
To begin with, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned common sense, because I have sort of started an institute of common sense for common sense. Because I agree with you, that's what I very often lack in the human society. That's common sense, you know. And we don't need more research, really, you know. We just need to use what we already have found. And among that is, of course, the protective measures we can do. Naturally, it's very difficult if we talk about these ever-traversing microwave radiations and radiofrequent radiations and so on. But to begin with, you have to, and I always tell people that ask that, you know, go home, look on everything you have and ask yourself, do we all, my wife and my husband and my children, use electric toothbrushes, or could we use ordinary old-fashioned ones? Do we have to have all these electric gadgets in the kitchen? Must our kids watch television 5 hours plus 5 hours with internet, or could they do something else? And could we actually throw out a lot of these things, trying to reduce exposure as much as we can? But still, the outdoor exposure coming through the walls, the ceiling, the floor and so on, that's more difficult. And then I would say the good thing is to listen to interviews like you are doing, to think for yourself. Do not trust me. Go to the literature, read for yourself, ask yourself questions, think again, and arrive at the conclusion for yourself and your family, and live by that. And I think that's a good start, and also to write to your local, national, as well as international politicians, to the European Commission, the European Union Parliament, to the United Nations and so on. And at least in Sweden, you know, Sweden is populated by very kind and nice people, and they never say very much no. But I tell people, just say no. This is enough. And start by using that simple word, you know. And I see more and more, especially parents, they do say no. They don't want to expose their children more to this. And as I said before, the reaction in this Swedish tabloid is very typical of 2015, that more and more people are standing up and saying that we need to do something about this. And the number of papers collected every day is too high to be neglected. And I'm still very surprised that authorities, parliament, governments and so on look another way. I'm very surprised by that, you know. I wouldn't dare to do that.
So do you think that we still have time to reverse all this?
I hope so. I do hope so. But we need to do something now, I would say. And not only something, we need to do something really big, I would say. And you know, just to interrupt you a little bit, it's not a big drama. A viewer of this interview could think, oh, no, this is just too big. Because if I do like this, and all the mobile phones, all the antennas and so on in the world disappears, they're just gone. Then actually from science we learned already several years ago that one thing will happen, namely that the psychosocial health will increase, because people will start to talk directly to each other, and the first thing people will say is, you know, sorry, my mobile phone has gone missing, and you will say, oh, that's the same for me. It just has disappeared. I had it in my bag, but it's gone. I must have lost it. And by the way, it's very odd, you see, we had a big antenna outside, it's just gone. And after that, life would continue. People need to communicate, they need to breathe, eat, sleep, go to school, go to job, and so on, you know. Nothing would really change. Life would continue, and just in another format and in another form, you know. So don't see this as a problem or crisis. This is an opportunity. And maybe here in Spain, maybe you will have very smart people sitting somewhere, you know, and inventing tomorrow's communication tools, whatever they will be. And suddenly Nokia and Ericsson and Motorola, they will be gone, you know, and they will all be a Spanish type of phone or whatever gadget we will use in the future. So again, don't look upon this as a crisis. This is definitely an opportunity to develop tomorrow's human-friendly technology.
But we need more independent scientists researching this.
Well, I would say you are very right in this. And unfortunately, this has been for the last 10, 15, 20 years a complete opposite trend in the Western world, at least. Less and less scientists are independent, and it's more and more difficult to work as an independent scientist. And for instance, I work at the Karolinska Institute, and as you know, it's very famous because it gives out the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. And people can come up to me at the Karolinska Institute and say to me, Olle, you are the last independent scientist here at the Karolinska Institute. And that's flattering, but it's also scary. It's really scary. I don't want to be the last, I want to be the first independent scientist. And the citizens, the taxpayers, and all the people out there, they rely upon us that we, as some kind of a mental fire brigade, we will run out into society, check while it's smoking, and see is there a fire or not, and use our toolbox and try to understand the smoke, try to understand what we should do, see what kind of damages there are, and we should of course have all the necessary support and tools and equipment and personnel and so on. And at least for myself nowadays, we don't have anything, you know. And just today, I was summoned to a meeting with my head of the department, a professor, Ceccatelli, and I know she's going to sort of put me against the wall because we don't have any money. So she will say that we cannot continue. And I mean, for me, it's sad in a way, but I'm not the loser. The losers are, of course, the concerned parents, it's the cancer victims, the electrohypersensitive people, and all the relatives who hope that we will be able to investigate these questions. And unfortunately, we cannot do very much at all. At the same time, just a few weeks ago, I was very, very honored to see that one of our papers have been published in Nature Scientific Reports, which is a very prestigious journal. So, you know, it sort of happens good and bad things at the same time. And I mean, I don't know really what to do. I've tried my very best. But without support, it's very, very difficult, of course, you know. And I just saw, you know, this year, there is a Swedish professor, Thomas Lindahl, who received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And I just saw an interview with one of his relatives who described that Thomas Lindahl used to work at the Karolinska Institute, but he couldn't stay. There was too much opposition, too little resources, so he left and went to England and to Cambridge and worked there and got the Nobel Prize. And in Sweden, you know, the headline said, a Swedish Nobel Prize. But it's an English Nobel Prize. We actually kicked him out, you know, by not supporting him. I'm not comparing myself with him, of course, no. But I mean, the situation is very similar, that we're kicking out people that maybe we need as these mental fire brigade soldiers. And well, I hope I'm wrong, because otherwise the future will be hard upon Sweden, you know.
So you've mentioned the Bio Initiative report, which you co-authored, but could you please recommend some independent scientific resources for those who would like to find more data on this?
Well, the easiest way to get data is from something called PubMed, which is a literature database where you can search for scientific publications. And if people have problems, they can of course contact their local universities who can help them with this. They usually have a university library with such search functions. And also, of course, if they download, like the Bioinitiative report, it will contain a lot of papers and summaries where they could read. But if they want to have a very, very, very short thing, because, you know, the Bioinitiative report today is in the order of 2,000 pages, so it's long. But if they want to have like 7, 8, 9 pages, there is a short summary that was published after a meeting in Norway, 2009, and the publication year is 2010, and it's from the Seletun statement, it's called. And if people are interested, I could send them this paper, and it summarizes in a very sort of ballpark manner, you know, one paragraph after the other. This is what you need to do. This is the kind of levels we recommend. And only remember, it's a compromise. If I would have written the Seletun statement, the recommended levels would have been much, much lower. But the various scientists have various ideas and how much we can allow people to be exposed and so on. But as I said before, I rather want to be safe than sorry.
Okay, so what is your current situation as a scientist now? You've mentioned that you just don't have a laboratory to investigate.
Yeah.
Are you still being threatened also?
Yeah. It's a hard time, to say the least, and especially 2015 has been a very odd year. It started already in January when the Swedish electrohypersensitive people and their handicap organization was severely attacked by medical doctors, including the medical doctors trade union and so on, you know. And they were very, very tough and said that they are not handicapped, and they compared them to Santa Claus and things like this, you know. But the Swedish authority responsible for this handicap classification was excellent, and said that the electrohypersensitive people, they are disabled, they have a functional impairment, they get the support they should have, period. But after that, more and more such attacks have come, and also from international doctors, and also people which used to be on the good side, suddenly have shifted to the bad side. And for me, that's very, very strange. And I have been in a lot of very strange situations, and I'm fighting, you know, and trying to help people with electrohypersensitivity to stay on this platform, because if they tumble off that, then they will land on the patient platform, and then they will not be protected from the final end stop, which is called the psychiatric platform. And then they will be just regarded as lunatics, and they will be sent to different psychiatric treatments. And I would hate that to happen. But, well, there are very, very strong forces in play, and I'm trying my best, but I cannot do very much. I have to be honest on that, you know.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Professor
you so much.
Johansson.
Thank you.
It's been such an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.